Let's get started. So this month's book is Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. I think Jamie was the one that slotted this in. We were all set to do a different book, and he put this one forward. I have to confess, I started trying to read this book in college and tried and failed. Rob Long tried to get me to read this book about a year and a half ago. No dice. But when Jamie said it, I was like, all right, let's check this one out. And I was not disappointed. This was a wild ride for me. So I am really looking forward to hearing everybody's thoughts on it, because I think everyone's adventure across the country to go on this motorcycle ride with Phaedrus and Chris and is probably different. So it'll be very interesting to hear what people think. We're gonna just go all the way through till about 8:25, and then I want to leave about 5 minutes for the decision on what our next book will be. But until then, let's kick it off. And one thing I wanted to point out, Lyle is using the thumbs up. We on Wednesday night during the Future of the Articulate Ventures Network, we started using those, and it's really effective. So if you've never used the reactions, they're down in the bottom right-hand corner. You can do thumbs up and clapping, but I guess Christina was saying there's a whole bunch more. So that's a good way to signal agreement. It's kind of a cool feature. So to start off, raise of hands. How many of you guys had read this book before? One. Only Jamie. Okay, wow. And Rob, there you go. Well, start off. Jamie, why did you propose this book to everybody? What made you think this would be a good one for us?
I like you said, it was a last minute sort of before we were just going to decide something else. And that book just came to me, and I was thinking back when I actually first read it. It was probably 17 years ago or so, and I was at a pretty interesting point in my life when I read it. And talking to a lot of people at that point, I was working in a little service industry job at a little tea house high up in the Rocky Mountains. Anyway, I came into contact with a lot of people daily that were hiking up to this tea house during this. Anyway, and no one I met had ever finished this book. A lot of people had started it. So I read it at that point in my life, finished it all. And it was just such a wild point in my life. I had a Volkswagen Westphalia. I was driving all around. I was doing that whole kind of life. I had just driven down to Mexico in that and all over. So that book really was read out of interest, like at such a pivotal point in my life. And I still don't truly understand it. I definitely didn't understand it then. Had some really good points to it and stuff that I connected with, but there was some heavy stuff in it that I didn't understand at all. And I still don't understand it going through it again, but there's definitely a lot of really good stuff I was able to pick up on. So it was just a book that I remembered being quite pivotal in my life, and one that doesn't get talked about that often. So for some reason, I just thought I'd throw it out there, and I'm glad it's new to everyone and everyone actually jumped on the idea of it, because it has a weird title and it kind of throws people off, I think. And yeah.
Well, for me, when I first started reading it, I felt like the author was really arrogant at first, and it was a huge turnoff. And I actually think it was probably more of a reflection of me and my confidence that I knew philosophy, and I didn't really want to hear this guy telling me that the way that I did things, because I 100% related to the people on the BMW. Like, buy a really nice machine, have somebody work on it, and don't mess around with it is absolutely my philosophy going into this book. What about you guys? Did you find yourselves being resentful, or was it, jump in, easy to start?
This book for me took a lot of time to get into. I picked it up at the library here about 10 years ago and thumbed through it, and I just assumed it was going to be a lot about motorcycles, and I put it back on the shelf and ignored it. And then when I picked it up this time, it felt like it was really kind of wavy. Like there was dry spells where it wasn't really substantive, and then all of a sudden you'd hit this really heavy spot. And you're like, "Oh man, this book is really getting it." And then you hit one of the dry spots again, and it was just really felt choppy to me for the first probably 100 pages or so. And it kind of started to get into a vibe then. And once you got to about page 200, all of a sudden it just smoothed out, and it was just the way you went with it. But good book.
What did you consider a dry spot, and what did you consider an exciting spot? Because that was where I was going to go. Is I was talking to a friend about this book last night, and she's very of, I think, the more what he describes as the romantic mindset, whereas I would categorize myself more classical, and I was like, oh yeah, I'd love the Chaturanga bits where he just dives into philosophy. And she's like, really? I didn't get any value in those. I'm pulling all of the same things he says there whenever he's talking about the narratives, right? And I think it's kind of that nonfiction versus fiction where you can get the direct things you want to know in one or signal in the other. And I think what made this book so good to a wide audience is he's able to play with both sides of that by kind of talking through the ideas directly, but then also giving the story as context for him also. But I guess to the question, yeah, which parts were dry for you?
It took me a while to figure out where he was going with it. And I think if I reread it now, it might not be quite as choppy. But I was, once I realized he was getting into philosophy, I kept waiting for that next philosophy hit. You know, I was kind of like a junkie. I wanted that needle in my arm. And so he'd start pulling back away from philosophy and going into the narrative side of it. And oh man, come on, dude, let's get back to the good stuff. And there was kind of that back and forth that you mentioned there. And it's been a good book to read.
I felt like it was a pretty strong opening. Like I was willing to buy into it, you know, the whole Chautauqua setup, like what Ben was talking about there, like that was exciting and lovely. Like I was just super happy to be riding on a motorcycle with these people, you know, and just kind of hearing this story. But I can definitely understand if you were not like looking forward to it or like into it, that it would be tedious to get through the kind of like describing of crossing the country and why you would favor the back roads and kind of the whole subjective experience of the thing. I feel like the concept there was very, again, what is that? The Heart of Darkness, right? Like going on this trip and kind of having these experiences over time so that you can communicate better in terms of those previous experiences that you had, like building that language together. But yeah, I loved it.
I thought it was really interesting in how he tied landscapes into different parts of where he was at in his mind. You know, as he came out of the Central Plains, there was that element of his mind, and then he got into the nothingness that's North Dakotans, and then he got into the hot stretch that's in Montana, and all that North and South, well, I guess South Dakota country and Montana country. I've been in it, I've seen it, and I kind of get it. But it was really interesting how he tied those landscapes and the heat and the climate and what was physically happening into this mental evolution as we get into this Phaedrus character, and it just accelerates and accelerates as you get closer and closer to Bozeman. So I thought that was, as you look back on it, I can see where he was going with it. It was a really interesting dynamic, I thought.
Brian, you're a South Dakota guy. Did the landscapes resonate with you?
A little bit, but they really kind of skated around North Dakota and then dropped down by the river to cross by Mobridge. So the middle of the state's kind of where you kind of got the east and west divide. So, I mean, you kind of got more of the western, kind of the flat, grassy plains that I think a lot of people expect in this area. And like East River here, we have a lot of trees and we're a lot of row crops, soybeans and corns. You know, we're raising 250 bushel corn. And so it's a little different.
You have some trees. I would not qualify it as a lot.
But I really liked where he got in and kind of touched more on base on the fact that you have the different mechanics, where the one that's cocky and, you know, thinks he knows it all doesn't know anything. The one who's quiet just gets to work, gets it fixed and gets it done and says, okay, here's your bill. And that's kind of where I come from, where I'm an engineer and I worked scrapyard work for a little while. You know, I kind of humble yourself back to do that tear apart physical labor and try and use it back to your mental side. And that's what I saw all throughout this book. Like Lyle was saying, each scenery was tied with the different Chautauqua.
Yeah, I really enjoyed this book, and I read the first like 5 pages and I was hooked, because I think a lot of it was about a month ago. I took a road trip out to Idaho by myself, and I've never been able to explain to people why I love just driving across the countryside. And so his description of the back roads and like why it was so meaningful to him was like, yes, like that's it. And like I could never articulate that. And I also, just throughout the book, I loved how he weaved in this narrative and like concrete things, like talking about the motorcycle maintenance with the philosophy. I felt like it helped it move along and helped give that illustration to it. And kind of what Brian was just saying, like I've done a lot of work with my brother. He does a lot of mechanical work. So I was like replacing the clutch in my car this spring, and like you forget to put something in and then you put a bunch more pieces on and then you realize, oh, I was supposed to put that in like 5 pieces before. And so when he was describing like all the setbacks, I was like, yep, like I know what that feels like. And I know that frustration. And I know that as soon as I get frustrated, things are just going to keep getting worse until I remember to get back into that peaceful state of mind. So I was absolutely fascinated with the book.
I didn't really find myself resonating with him. I thought the part when he was talking about the back roads was a little bit like a gimme, like a gimmick. It was like, yeah, everybody knows that you should do the back roads. And he did an okay job of describing it. But when he described that he ran out of gas and he goes through the long, tedious explanation of it, and then it ultimately is that he ran out of gas, that's when I was like, I saw more of myself in him in that part. And that's when I started to let my tenseness grow with it, or let go of my tenseness with that and get way more into what he had to say.
You had said you sympathized more with the couple than with him.
Yeah, I mean, just that they're like concepts of like, hey, let's just get this done. I mean, he ends up making them into kind of an Ayn Rand, straw man of an example of society. But I mean, if I'm being honest with myself, the parts of the book that I really didn't like were the parts that he was pointing out about them that I definitely could see in me. The part where you're just like, come on, let's just rush and get through this. Hey, this is not the important part. I want to get to where we're going. And it took a long time for me to listen to him. And it wasn't until actually he started describing Montana and the landscapes, and then I started hearing Lyle in him. And that's when I was like, okay, this is a guy I can relate to.
That's really interesting because before you knew Lyle and you tried to read this book and it didn't happen for you. So now that you know Lyle and you have someone in your mind that you can make the connection with, it's so much easier to go through those hard parts of life with, making these connections.
Man, I'm going to have to go buy a Harley just to live up to this now.
What about you, Travis? I remember when you picked up the book, and then it wasn't very long before you were way into it.
Yeah, I got into it almost instantly. You know, even some of the opening pages, just the way they described the open roads and, you know, being free and, you know, being attached by being on a motorcycle and really what that meant. There were some great quotes that were in there as well. But yeah, the whole thing connected with me out of the gate. It got a little, I won't say difficult to understand, kind of this other character and what really happened. And, you know, but I'd put it down for a while and then pick it back up. But I was in it right away. And, you know, all the maintenance with on the motorcycle and just the way he thought through it and taking care of things that he had bought. And, you know, that's the quality aspect of it. It just reminded me a lot of probably my grandfather and my father. You know, there's a language of when an engine is really humming along, you know, they can feel it, you can hear it, but you don't hear it unless it's not working. It becomes part of it. So yeah, actually the other people I didn't like, you know, the U Vance, the other people on the BMW, I couldn't stand them. And then, you know, it was a good observation to kind of see how they interacted. But yeah, great read, man. This was great. So I appreciate the recommendation.
You know, I had a little bit of difficulty with it when he was in the Montana area too. I had an office in Bozeman for a while and worked with an environmental firm there as a consultant, and at the university too. And this was in the early 90s, and I got distracted, I think, by what I knew and the familiarity I had with some of the areas he was in. And when he was teaching at the university and was insane at the time, so to speak, and his talk about the quality and the different things, it was difficult for me because I couldn't separate reality from his fantasy, so to speak, or his interpretations of things. I was too connected to the real world in that area to, like when he went on the hike and he and his son were trying to connect, and he was trying to connect with nature. And, for me, I couldn't keep the separation. I couldn't keep the real world from the not so real world that was in his mind as the insane person before his treatments.
Mike, you bring up the son. I'm curious what the group thinks about the relationship that there was between the father and son there as that developed. That was a puzzle that I had.
In like the second half of the book, or maybe it was the last third of the book, I just had this fear that something terrible was going to happen between the two of them. I didn't know, like I felt like either one of them was going to die or something bad was going to happen. Like I didn't know what that bad thing necessarily was. But then when they ultimately connected because they realized they were more of the same, and his son was struggling, I think, with some of the same issues that he had struggled with previously in life. And Chris didn't feel alone after that. Like the fact that he wanted to send him back on the bus, like, so like I got frustrated with Chris a few times, like when he was having his meltdowns or he would make the excuse of stomach pains. And it was like, come on, you're better than that. Like you can get through this. And so I don't know.
I always had a lot of sympathy for him. I saw those moments too, but I guess I didn't know what kind of level of cognition he had, and they had expressed some challenges. So, yeah.
Yeah, his dad was very patient with him, but like I felt like if he had opened up to him sooner, that maybe but then maybe that was his own like stumbling block that he couldn't open up to his son.
Was Chris there for the purpose of healing his father, or was his father there for the purpose of connecting with his son? That's what I could never identify.
That's an interesting point. I think the first sign of conflict I felt between the two was when they had set out their tent somewhere on this godforsaken campground, and the son wanted to ask. He had question after question, and his dad just told him go to sleep, ignored him, and it was that was a conflict there that I man, this guy's really kind of being a jerk to his kid. Where he's they're out on this trip, they're discovering life, they're discovering themselves, and they're discovering the country, and they're supposed to have time for leisure, and he doesn't even have time to answer one more question in the middle of this prairie tent camp time where leisure is the kind of the purpose of the trip.
So I wonder if the part of him that does relate to Chris is, I mean, clearly Phaedrus has a relationship with Chris that's different, right? Like when he shows up, Chris recognizes him and knows kind of what's going on, and is like clearly been talking to the narrator even when we're not being narrated to, in the off-screen time. Maybe that's what we're supposed to take out of this, that he doesn't relate well to Chris, and that I don't know, since he describes himself as the classic part, maybe Phaedrus is more the romantic type, but that doesn't really square with the description of Phaedrus. Yeah, let's not go there.
I really struggled with it because, I'm the middle child of 7, so my dad never gave me as much time as that kid. In the sum total of my childhood, I think I had as much time with my dad as he did in 2 days. So for me, the kid having this relationship with his father that was, anything less than whatever his dad wanted to do it, was really hard for me to square. I know that's not, the way everybody has relationships with their parents, but that was definitely my experience.
But that kid did have a pretty good history of mental illness up to that point. It wasn't a new thing, so parents can get pretty worn down by that stuff over and over and over again. So now that I've worked in those industries with teenagers and those kinds of things, so I now kind of see it as maybe that dad was just taking this son to get him out of his situation. They've been seeing psychologists, psychiatrists, and this was back in the 70s. So that's pretty progressive back then, even to be taking your kid to that. That wasn't that common in the 70s. Even to be talking about mental illness or that kinds of stuff. So I don't know if anyone was there to necessarily heal each other or heal the son, dad heal. I don't know if he might have just been taking him to get him away from the mom and the other kid and all the turmoil that would entail with these outbreaks at home and the fighting with that kinds of stuff. So maybe he was just taking him on that summer trip. He'd been at summer camp and he was just trying to just keep him busy. But I didn't like how quickly he had him stigmatized and was calling him out and saying he was mentally ill, because you're really not supposed to be diagnosing children at that age with any sort of mental illness. That's a developmental thing, and that's kind of wrong for like a lot of these kinds to be calling someone schizophrenic or that kind of thing before a certain age. And
was it wrong in the 70s though?
That's exactly. So I did probably not, definitely not. Nothing was wrong. Everything was permissible. But now, from my point of just reading through this kinds of stuff, but knowing how much stigmatization hurts people. So at that age, what was he, 9? Going on this trip and being called, you have mental illness from age 9, you're going to be kept in a certain boat for the rest of your life, basically. And he was, when you kind of, when he went the way he was predicted to go at that age. And yeah, but yeah, nowadays you probably wouldn't be calling out a kid at 9 and saying you're mentally ill, that kinds of stuff. At least not here.
Brian, did you picture Chris to be your son's age or older, or how did that go?
Yeah, that's the one thing that I could kind of relate to, especially we just had a family kind of outing. We had a trip for a meeting in Pirsig, 3 hours away. So you kind of get to that point with them at the end of the day at night. It's like, okay, enough questions. You've asked me a million questions all day. Let's take a break. And I got 4 of them that can currently ask questions. And that's, I could really relate with that. But at the same time, I kind of pictured, my oldest son, I don't know that I'd take my oldest son on a 4-wheeler or a motorcycle for that part across country. Just, I don't know. I don't care for motorcycles. Even I'm nervous letting them drive the tractor down the road at age 9. And I was hauling bales by myself at age 8 down the state highway. So it's a kind of a totally different world from then to now. And that's the one thing that really stuck out to me as I was reading through is my kind of relationship with my kids, and like the times when he had accidents where he got diarrhea and he's just like, yep, we're just going to go. We'll take care of it. We'll come back, and it kind of surprised me coming from him, the father, that with his personality that he's like, yep, we're just going to take care of it. It's no big deal. Go wash the underwear. They'll be clean tomorrow. We're good. And you still have to have those breathing points, even when you're upset or like, just quit asking me questions, but yeah, go take care of that and we'll get done. And I found that more interesting than some of the, I guess, more Plato and Socrates stuff towards the end. It got pretty thick, a lot to take in, and I'd like to re-listen to it again. But that's what I took a lot away from, was more kind of the physical and the start of the.
I was reading or listening to because I got to a point where I just couldn't pick it up. So I ended up getting the audiobook and doing the second half of the book audiobook. And I was changing my daughter's diaper while he was talking about his son getting diarrhea. And the thought crossed my mind, if I had not had a child where I had done this for so willingly, there's no way I would have understood him being so patient with his son having diarrhea. But as a parent, you now know it's not his fault. He's just doing what he's got to do. So you talked about the philosophy. Let's hop over to that part of it, because this was like a book within a book within a book. What was anybody have any lines or one of the first times when I started to, and this was when he was still talking about the couple. One lives longer in order that he may live longer. There is no other purpose. And that was when he starts kind of opening up the societal view of the world, the natural state that you just kind of are at unless you have some direction. Did anybody else pick up on that line?
Yeah, I remember that when I picked up on it. That took me back to kind of when we read The Naked Sun when people were living for 300 years. Like, if you're not going to make anything of it, what is the point? You need to, just experience. I think at one point they go through a part where they're talking about the only thing that's ever happened to you is happening right now. The past and the future is irrelevant. The only thing you can do anything with is like this very second right now.
I definitely picked up on that when they were talking about, you live longer to live longer, and talking about their struggle with the arguments of rationality was really interesting to me.
It was striking to me as that line jumped out amidst the context of this discussion of how the couple interacted with technology and how they interacted with life in general, and it kind of struck me the futility of being less than engaged in life and being able to live a long time but not being engaged while you live a long time was kind of the way that jumped out at me. And I thought, man, what an existence to have that couple's mindset and be so detached from things and actually maybe be scared of things, being scared of the unknown, or being scared of what's coming in a long life. What horror there is in that.
I thought it was interesting, being the book is 1974 and they're talking about technology. I'm like, man, what if that book was written right now? And like, I was even thinking about my sister and her husband. They go kind of that route once a year or close to it on their motorcycle. And just even, he's trying to yell at Chris and hit him, look at the birds or look at the deer on the sides. They're like, my sister and her husband, their helmets have Bluetooth, so they can easily talk to each other and point out these things. And I was always throwing out, even just the technology of a motorcycle is different 45 years later.
Yeah, and that technology side, you look at it as it can be as much as you want it to be or as little, same as your involvement. And that's one thing with all the people that I see here in this group is they're all involved somewhere doing something, trying to make their community, the world, something better, or even their family. And that's the big thing, that you have all this technology now that they didn't have when I was a kid. I mean, we didn't have internet till I was in high school at our house. And now we have internet. We can learn anything you want, but do we? We sit down and veg out in front of the TV and do a bunch of that type of stuff. And you look at this technology side, you can make much more of an impact now than you ever would have been able to locally and nationally all at once. And that's the biggest dichotomy of this book, is it kind of showed the two sides, the classical and romantical, and how to intertwine those.
Yeah, and he touched a couple times on, let's not blame the people making technology for the evil of technology. It's what you choose to do with it that makes it good or bad.
Absolutely.
And what about the Chautauqua part of it, where he's actually laying out philosophy? Towards the end, he gets to the Aristotelian stuff, but before that, as he's describing the dichotomies and the classical and the romanticism, was there anybody that was the part? Lyle, you had said that was the part of the book that you were looking for as a drug hit. You liked it a bunch. I imagine, Rob, that was something you resonated with as well.
Yeah, totally. Go ahead.
Oh, no. I was just saying I enjoyed it because I have been biking on my pedaling bike. And as I listened to him go through his thoughts, it kind of made me think about how I use my time when I'm on my bike without headphones in or listening to something. So I enjoyed his thought process and how he took us along that ride with him. So that's all.
Yeah, no,
yeah, I'll do. Go ahead,
Rob. Go ahead.
Okay. No, I'm just going to say that the whole, the dichotomies, of course, very interesting to me. This concept has been not dormant, but very active in my brain over the last year and a half, collecting examples of things that are dichotomies, that are kind of metaphors for order and chaos. And I felt like that's, pretty much a central theme of this book, although the order and chaos part is not so played up. But that he kind of makes the term dialectic into a bad thing, right? He describes it as the ultimate, establishment of logical truth. Like, instead of a dialogue, a dialectic is arriving at that truth. So maybe I'm using the wrong term, but to me, the thing that I think of when I think of that word is this balancing between the two dichotomous opposites, like finding some, like a market price between, demand and supply, that kind of balance that happens, where you need both ends of this. You need idealism and you need pragmatism, and there's some kind of a balance between those two forces. And people tend to fall into camps and argue for one or the other. But if you ever actually got your wish and had all one or all the other, it would be totally dysfunctional, in obvious ways that you see in the two characters there, right? And maybe the thing is that we see is that between Phaedrus and the normal guy driving the motorcycle, the amount of time that they each spend in that body together balances out to make some roughly sane individual there that gets through this stuff to a degree, I guess.
That's a solid take. I felt like I resonated with this a little bit in the sense that, given my recent farm experience and kind of the I'll say upheaval that I've had in my life, I've had a search for meaning and a search for how things fit together, and a kind of a search for what the big picture really is. And so this journey and this trip resonated with me in that way. And then part of my personal experience has been little, I think he called it fragments during the part where they talk about, he talks about quality and are you teaching quality? And that chance conversation with the clerk down the hall that was watering your plants, that I've had those little trigger and chunk moments where whoa, this is it. That's suddenly is defining a whole piece that I was looking for weeks or months or whatever it is. So this was really interesting to me in the way that he laid out these different triggers and chunks to discover those bigger pieces. I guess you'd call them, within the context of this book, the branches that were coming out of the roots. Those were the philosophical pieces that really hit me.
Yeah, I really enjoyed all the philosophical pieces of it. I took a just intro to philosophy course in my community college last fall. And it made me wish that I had paid more attention in that class. But I still recognize some of the names. But one of the things that really struck me the most was talking about like this dichotomy and how maybe it doesn't have to be one or the other. Because I found a lot of the things that the way that I look at the world is I can see all sides usually. In an argument, like I'm that person who's like in the middle, and I'm like, yeah, I can see where that person is coming from, and I can also see where that person is coming from. And it's super frustrating for me because it'd be so much easier to just like take a solid opinion and just like stick with that. So it was kind of, I don't know, it was encouraging to me to see that maybe it's okay that I'm in the middle. I was talking with one of my brothers the other day about how like people think that moderates like just don't care. It's like, no, like I'm an opinionated moderate. Like I'm passionate about being a moderate. And so this kind of resonated with me.
Things are usually some sort of shade of gray.
Yeah, he's really toting kind of non-dualism in a way, with that idea of like what he kept referring to as quality, that journey from one end of the dichotomy to the other, from classical to romantic or vice versa, or to use other terminology maybe more common in the network, like objective to subjective. Like there's a gap as you transfer an idea from one end of that spectrum to the other. And yeah, it was interesting. I really enjoyed it.
I had no idea when he started the conversation about quality that was then going to go throughout the rest of the book, because I actually thought his beginning descriptions of you can't define quality to be like, I like completely wrote it off and was like, okay, I want to hurry past this, because you can put a definition on the word quality, and it felt like he was intentionally not doing that. And I think that I just either wasn't paying attention or didn't really understand what he was saying all the way until the end, when that's when you start to realize he doesn't believe in this dualism, and that when you strip it out, that it's not more quality or less quality or, you know, some relative scale, that it is something in and of itself that's undefinable. I mean, I still don't think I understand that idea, but I at least accepted that he had something more important to teach there than in the beginning when he was teaching his rhetoric class.
So Vance, this is subjectivity, right? It's like my first person experience is something that no other living thing can share, because nothing can occupy the same space and the same viewpoint as I have, right? They may be very similar, and that's why we can understand one another and we have some kind of common backgrounds. But that's I mean, I feel like that's the point of quality, is that it's this mysterious thing that it's hard to account for. It's the individuality or idiosyncrasy of all of our thoughts, really.
Yeah, I had the same experience as Vance. Like, for me, I was glad I had the audiobook, because once they got into Bozeman and he was flashback to the teaching area, that book, it just like kind of crawled to a stop for me. So, you know, I was just driving in my truck, or we started harvest last week. So, you know, I got time. I can listen to this and get through it. But we had the quality thing. I was like, dude, calm down. It's not that big of a deal. But then, like Vance said, then like way later at the end, it finally all starts to gel and come together.
I think actually I started picking up on it, and Rob threw into the chat the one of the gumption traps, and that was when I started realizing, like, well, if you embrace this concept of quality, then the goal of getting through to the end, it does make the whole thing about the journey as opposed to the arrival at the end. The end state of being of high quality ends up being by default if you avoid the gumption traps and if you care about the development.
That's probably also a good way to describe how you could enjoy reading this book, right? If you are constantly waiting for the philosophic part or the whatever part to come up and kind of like, when are we going to get there? That's exactly the point that he's making. I mean, like, it's the joke's on you, I guess, but, you know, like if you enjoy reading the book just word for word, then you're going to have a good time and it's going to go by really, really well. But otherwise it's kind of a slog, right? Like the journey.
Yeah, the gumption traps was probably my favorite part, because whenever he's talking about actual maintenance, like I've been there like 1,000 times where he's trying to take the screw out of the cover, but I've never taken this apart. I don't know what's on the other side of it. I don't know what to do. Of course, now you can get on YouTube and find somebody that has, so you can see it. But I've had all the thoughts that he has, but he's fleshed them out way more than I've ever taken the time to. And the part that really stuck out to me was, when you get stuck, realize that this is the point of greatest learning is about to happen. And there's that thing where you're working on something, I don't know what the name for it is, but I'm starting to get better at the part where I get stuck. I don't know what to do next. I know if I leave and go to sleep and come back tomorrow, somehow it just suddenly works. And I quit. Like, I don't know what happened, but it just, all the pieces fall together.
Yeah, it clicks. And that's one thing that drove me nuts when I went from, I'm this engineer, I should know how stuff comes together and goes apart, to trying to tear down tractors they put together 50, 60 years ago. And it's like, this one little part will come apart, but there's a screw up in behind that you can't see. And if you don't know about it, you're not going to find it. And that's he talked about what you don't know and how do you know that you don't know it and how do you get there? Like when he talked about his quality and all of his teaching, and when he was a teacher going to school, I guess I found that really intriguing, that he was teaching, but he was also trying to learn and get in and teach some of the teachers and throw it back at them.
That really is a great metaphor for the for the journey when you think about it, the maintenance aspect, because if you go in to repair something like your motorbike, like he insinuates, and you've got this predetermined notion of what you think the problem is, and you're going down these routes instead of you're exploring this thing for what the problems might be. And that's kind of that semblance of enjoying the journey. Like, I'm just going to dive in here and figure out the problem instead of, you know, trying to create these different avenues. It's like novelty search at the mechanical level, except you've got an objective and you're moving towards it. But yeah, you figure it out along the way one way or another.
Mike, you've probably repaired some stuff over the years. What's your experience here?
Well, I didn't repair a harness for horses. I'm not that old, but but close. Anyway, yeah, I mean, there's a whole lot to learn about those things, and I related to that, you know, between the motorcycle and the story quite well because of, like you say, repairing different things over time. The thing that I don't understand and still don't understand was what was the purpose of chastising the students that were in his classes in Bozeman. I mean, in my mind, it was total chastisement of those students. And all I could get through my mind was what I went through at a university, because I was an ag student and I had a terrible experience with a liberal arts instructor against ag kids during that early 70s. And all I could think is I had a lot of ranch friends in Montana and people close to my age that went to school there, and I thought, you're a total ass. That's all I could think was, you're picking on those students because of who they are, which wasn't at all true, but I don't think. But it bothered me so much, it probably ruined the rest of the book for me. I just got it upset me. It's
Jeremy,
just
did you struggle with that part?
Not as much, because I've had several experiences in my liberal arts education where professors were much like that, so I actually found it more relatable than anything else. A lot of his experiences with education, I felt, painted kind of a sad outlook, quite frankly.
I kind of liked that idea of his removing the incentive mechanism. Like the last couple book clubs, I keep bringing up the Gita. I read probably 50 pages a month because it's so dense. But around the same time I was reading that in this book, I had read a passage in there that referred to the idea of transcending incentive mechanisms. Like if you transcend the incentive of achieving an A and you're just moving towards, you're following that path of quality, what can you accomplish? And you take that in terms of like our life as adults. If you transcend the money incentive, what can you accomplish? If you transcend the freedom incentive, what can you accomplish? It's this idea of, not working for these material things, but what do you want to accomplish, and just walking the path, I think. But he was doing that kind of at the university level, where it's like, what are you here to write? He's in his writing class. What are you here to write it and make it quality?
That's a really cool idea.
Yeah, I like
Interesting.
that part. I've tried to put that into our kids a little bit, that the end goal isn't the trophy or whatever or the grade. It's the knowledge or ability you gained to get there. The grade is irrelevant.
I was really struck by the idea of university as a, how's he put it, the university as a location versus the university as a, help me out here, Rob, the Bricks and Mortar University versus the Thought University.
Like that line where he goes with the church, where it's desanctified and all that.
The Church of Reason. Yeah,
there you go.
Yeah, that really hit me, and I think it kind of ties into some things we've talked about within the network, where we're at this probably a societal shift of with online universities and all these other access mechanisms to knowledge that we have. And now the bricks and mortar institution isn't the ideal, or may cease to be the ideal. That line, or that portion of the book really jumped out at me as kind of predictive.
I mean, as you say that, I'm thinking about, so a couple of things. Like, I see the purity of what you're saying, Ben. Like, if you could strip out the incentive mechanism and you could get large amounts of people to embrace the journey, that this would be some form of utopia. But that is like a nowhere place. Like, I mean, I know somebody very close to me that they have no incentive to do anything. And it's very difficult to get someone to strive for quality when they don't have some place to go towards. Like novelty search that you can go on where you're able to like look around and say, that looks interesting, I'm going to take a step towards that and I'm going to go deeper or further, is I don't know that it's so easily attainable by everyone. I think maybe the step of pulling people through with grades or with incentives is one way to get them on the path that then you can get to another level. But I think to eliminate that too quick, to pull the curtain out or to pull the rug out, seems dangerous to me.
Well, I think we see a lot of that. Like, I think you're exactly right. And we see a lot of that in our society today where we've created this I don't even want to attribute it to the everybody's a winner mentality, right? But it's like you're a superstar, super unique, amazing human being just because you're here and you're alive. And that's sort of the dichotomy, right? Is that's true. You're an amazing, unique, incredible human who can go out there and accomplish something. But we've given people that idea too soon in a way where it's inhibiting their ability to be like, okay, now what do I do with that responsibility of being this amazing, unique person who needs to go out there and walk my path? Like, to your point, like we are seeing that like actively right now. And that people are like, all right, cool. I can go out there and do anything, like whatever. But yeah, maybe we're seeing
Jamie,
it already.
You're a guy that has left behind a lot of the pursuit of success. I mean, you've brought this up. You'd rather barter. You're not out making your farmer's market to bring in lots of money. What are you thinking here as we're talking about this?
Yeah, I don't like the idea of having to follow grades and follow that sort of I don't like sports and scoring. I hate the Olympics. I hate that sort of that you have to strive so hard for that sort of stuff. And I understand it'd be hard to take that away, but just imagine if people were just living their passions and just striving for their ultimate every day because they actually wanted to strive for it. And it wasn't because I'm going to win that gold and then I'm going to get all these sponsorships because of that gold medal or that kind of thing. Or even in school, like a lot of people are forced into these top of the class, you got to be the best, from really early on. And I don't, if you removed like all that competition, it would be pretty amazing. Competition over a monetary, like over really just a letter or a percentage, it really doesn't mean anything.
But
Jamie,
there
what
is
did you think
something
about
to. Oh, go ahead, Nick. Go ahead.
the part of the book that he talked about removing it, and then you still had that where the underachievers underachieved until the very end? What did you think about that part? And granted, who knows if this was actually happening or if it's all fake and he's, I still struggle with what part of the book is real and what part of the book is his imagination, the fictional autobiography.
I don't think it's fictional. I don't really know, but I could see it as a pretty good descent into the madness and the mental illness that he had and all the treatment afterwards, which he touches on.
The Wikipedia said it was fictional. It was a fictional autobiography. That's all I know. I don't know. I wasn't alive in the 70s.
Yeah, me neither.
But what do you think about the part where he talks about they removed the grades and the underachievers still underachieved? They removed everything and then they still had that separation.
Well, you're underachievers, and you can't just take away from someone that has been conditioned to be an underachiever, basically, up to that point. You'd have to start that much, much earlier than whatever first year university, whatever that is, 18, because you're looking for, you have to want to achieve, you have to learn achievement and wanting to achieve it much earlier in life and the goals of personal achievement. I don't think you can just remove something at that point and say, oh, we're instantly going to see a change. I think it's pretty neat. It's a good experiment.
Yeah, I think the two kind of sides of that is, the one thing is if you don't know you're going in the wrong direction, how do you correct it? Other than showing a good direction. We listened to a CD on the way that has a song, I hope you pick it up one day. It's country song. So he talks about, he sets a Bible, a fishing rod, sets a good example with how he lives. And he's hoping his children pick up the good things he's doing and one day do that. And I think that's kind of what the book's getting at, but I still think there needs to be that direction there. And one good thing Vance picked out on one of my videos earlier is, how do you get a 4-year-old to grab a shovel and want to do it? You show them it's fun. You show them what the end result is, that there is a goal and a reward, and not necessarily monetary, but you got healthy, happy cattle. You have a lifestyle where you can be out in the country and you can run for a mile before you run into, another vehicle, another person. And, that's your goal. And I think I kind of agree with you, Jamie, that let's not make everything monetary, but I don't know that we can go back to a trade standard with how we've established our culture currently.
Well, what do you think about at the end of the book where Chris is saying, I hate this, and then his dad says, I know, buddy, I'm going to send you away. That's the alternative. And then his son is like, he makes that click. Like, I've worked at summer camps with children from Kansas City, and to see them make that transition in their brain of like, oh, I don't have to act out. I don't have to be an underachiever to get results. What do you think about that for your children, seeing the click of the alternative of not picking up a shovel is, staying at home with mom. But if I pick up the shovel, I get to go hang out with dad.
Yeah, and that's something I still try and balance yet, because you go to my oldest, to my second and third oldest, and my oldest, he likes being outside, but he'd rather be inside doing something with books or writing, and that's great. And then you got my next two where they're like, can I go outside? Can I go outside? Let me go outside. It's like, well, no, you got to do your chores inside, and then you can come outside, because it's like coming outside's a treat, but it's more work than inside, so I don't get it. So I'm struggling with that balance, and everybody's different, but if we could get everybody back towards that, I think have them a goal of work towards a betterment of future and show them how to get involved at a young age. Like, we just took ours to a meeting for Farm Bureau Young Farmers and Ranchers and showed them what we do, and we toured. It was at the state capitol, so we toured the capitol and told them what happens here. We make bills into laws that affect if you get a speeding ticket, or why we have speeding tickets, and why we have different regulations that affect our farm.
So this has been one of the most robust discussions we've ever had, and I'm more than happy to let it keep riding. But in case there's anybody that needs to leave, I want to throw up a poll for the next book. And I threw up something on the network to ask for some input on what book should we read. And then I actually had a good chat with Rob earlier today. And there's a couple thoughts I want to throw up before we do the poll. And one is, we've got this bad boy coming up in December. So we want to keep in mind that it might not be a bad idea to have a lighter read in October or November in order that we can still have time to be getting through this, which is 7 Pillars of Wisdom. If you haven't picked that up, we're going to do a regular book we're going to do this as December's book, but we're expecting that it's going to be so long and heavy that you want to start now. But the other thing is, one time we tried to do a nonfiction book. We did The True Believer, And that didn't really bring out the richness of discussion, because nonfiction, you end up talking, and in some ways, Seven Pillars of Wisdom is nonfiction, but it's a story. But it's that you're then discussing facts. So I know we had talked about people wanting to do Carl Jung or doing Nietzsche, but like I would like to propose that it's good to do fiction for these. Maybe it's not, we don't have to, but I'm saying by using literature, we get to pull more meaning out of it, just like we are here, where there's so many threads. And I also wanted to point out that it might be nice. We have done some pretty dark books. It might be nice to do something a little bit lighter, but I'm open. So I'm going to throw up the poll. Some of these were, oh shoot, I thought I had that all loaded up. Let me pull that up here. And then if somebody has an unnamed book that they would like to throw in there, then we can do that one. But here, can you guys see the poll right now?
Yeah.
You don't have to do Rascal, but it's pretty good.
So there's The Prince, Machiavelli, and I know Jeremy had thrown his hat saying, hey, he liked that book. Since October's month is Dragon Spotting, I decided to throw in The Hobbit. I actually have never read that book, and I think it might be kind of fun. Rascal was Nick's suggestion. I actually looked it up on Wikipedia. It looks like a fun book about a boy and his raccoon. There's Dracula. So we've got October, which I thought, maybe it'd be fun to do kind of the Dracula theme. And then Swiss Family Robinson, which I thought like, hey, that's just a totally out of the blue kind of fun adventure book. I've only ever seen the Disney, live action version of it. So those are our options out there. And it won't let me vote from here. So I have one vote that I'm going to throw in if we need a tiebreaker here. But go ahead and take your time and throw some votes in here.
Is the Swiss Family Robinson like really long? Like
I don't know.
Are you thinking of that red covered book we read when we were like 8?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's not. I don't know off the top of my head how many pages it is. I've read the whole thing back in probably high school or maybe college, and it's. I would say it might have a lot of pages, but I don't think it's a particularly slow read.
Let's find out on Audible. That's my gauge.
I really enjoyed it when I was, like I said, 8.
Yeah, same.
So
I just wanted to
it was a really good read then.
It's 12 hours, so it's pretty long.
Shorter than this one by 4 hours.
Yeah.
So instead of, I'm going to throw this out there, and as like an unnamed book, Dracula kind of sparked my thinking there, and I was like, I've never read Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. She was married to Percy Shelley, who wrote Ozymandias, which is like one of my favorite poems of all time. And it seems like a legit work of fiction that has influenced thought throughout time. So I'm going to throw that out there if anybody cares.
I read Dracula actually at the same time that we read Frankenstein. I remember we had talked about it at that point, and it was.
Did you guys already do it?
It was
no, we did Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde.
Yeah. But I read all 3 of those that same month, and they were. Dracula had some interesting things going on in it. It was not at all what I expected it to be, but it was a quality read.
So we'll say that the unnamed book is Rob's suggestion of
Mary Shelley's Frankenstein.
Yeah, Frankenstein. All right, we still have half the people yet to vote.
We are not allowed to vote for our own. Is that correct?
No, you can vote for any of them you want.
And you got a comprehensive list there, Vance. That's a tough list to choose from.
Yeah.
Might have to get some dice out.
Rank voting. I'm kidding.
Got to make it easy after a whole weekend trip with 5 boys.
Rascal is another movie that was made by Disney. It's a North American author.
Oh man, we're gonna have a tight one here. We got one other person that's yet to vote yet.
With the Electoral College, Ryan and I should have a pretty substantial role in this election.
All right, so all of the votes are in. The only one that it was a 5-way tie Here, I'll share it because my vote. Actually, no, we do have a winner because my vote is for The Hobbit. So it looks like it's going to be The Hobbit by a single vote.
That'll be a good book.
Yep.
All right.
Like it.
So October, Dragon Spotting. We'll do The Hobbit. Everybody, thumbs up. You guys in? Try and do next month. Great. Well, we can hang out. I am, but I just wanted to make sure we had that, and then if anybody needed to get off at 8:30, but
As
I would
for
say let's
listening to The Hobbit. I'm gonna jump out of here. But as for listening to The Hobbit, there's one edition that's from like the 60s, I think the mid 60s. That's a recording on records, and it's out there in YouTube and various places. I don't urge anybody to break the law, but if you happen to find it in some legitimate way, go ahead and
Throw it
listen
up
to
there.
that. It's really good. Yeah, that's a good call.
Great. Well, thanks for everybody, and then otherwise we can just stay and hang out and talk about either the rest of Zen and the Art or whatever you'd like.
I just got
Anybody
one
read the
comment,
afterword?
Lance, before this gets to something else. Your mail system in St. Louis sucks.
It's terrible. It's the worst. I told you, man. Brian sent me something, and it showed up in St. Louis, and he was like, "It should be there today," and I was like, "No, man, it'll be like three or four more days," and it was.
You must
Anybody
have the
read
same.
the afterword? Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Lyle. I was just curious.
I was just gonna say he must have the same FedEx guy I do. Weather delays on sunny days.
So Ben, going with the afterword, so I caught that about 2 hours ago, and I was stunned when he said Chris was murdered, and that whole part of it was like that like made the whole book like lock into a different place in my mind. And I'm sorry that his son had to die in that way to make that happen, but it really did. It was like, whoa.
Yeah, and the way that he described, what is he missing, and this gets into the patterns, right? And he, talks about, what do I miss about Chris being gone? Is it his physical body that's not here? And what he was saying was, it's the pattern, and the pattern is not here, and how people will latch on to headstones and not get the same feedback because it's latched to an inanimate object. But anyway, yeah, the afterword actually kind of like shook me, to the core. I was like, holy cow, like this thing all ties back together. And kind of what he got into about, losing a loved one, that was pretty profound, I thought.
Yeah, and I was sitting there playing with my daughter as he then was talking about wanting to have the abortion and then stopping. And like, I thought, man, that guy really gave it his all for the benefit of all of us. Like, that was something deeply personal to be thrown out there like that.
Yeah, the abortion part, I was like, what are you, like, you'd lost one and you're not gonna try to have the next one? And then
well, and it seems so out of character with his maintenance thing, right? With his I did the audiobook, but it was the 25th anniversary edition, and I wasn't thinking of skipping it or anything. There's like a foreword, and it was almost kind of a spoiler, but in a way it had me looking forward to how things were going to unfold. He says 25 years later in the foreword part, he made two mistakes. One's kind of minor and doesn't mean anything. I forget what it actually means.
Wasn't it the wolf thing?
Phaedrus does not mean wolf.
Yeah.
He found that out mistakenly somehow. And the other part was the Phaedrus personality takes over at the end. He said that was a mistake. He should have done the ending that way. And then that made me wonder, would Chris be dead or not, based on what their relationship was.
I thought Nick had a line, so to your point about Phaedrus taking over, Nick had a line in the network about going on autopilot that I don't think the ending of the book would have meant as much to me if I hadn't read your line about you got to be careful not to go into autopilot. Do you know what I'm talking about, Nick? So tell, for the group, anybody that didn't read it, what that was.
The idea that, like, when he went into full Phaedrus and he went on the quality path and he just delved into going insane, basically. That I think that's the part that we don't know how much of that was real, because the book is an autobiography, but we don't know if it's how much is, he changed the names to protect the innocent. But when we do the same thing, when we go on autopilot and just say, hey, I'm just going to zone out and do whatever I'm going to do, and I'm going to release all bases with reality, because this is it only matters what I'm thinking about. And he had doctors and teachers saying, hey, you better stop. And he just went full on, this is the quality is what I need to worship. I need to focus just on this thing and find this is my purpose in life. And then he just totally lost contact with everything else.
Makes me think about being on a phone and life going by around you.
Did you guys think that he brought Phaedrus back? Was Phaedrus always going to come back, or did Phaedrus come back because he went on that journey with his son?
It seemed like he went looking to me.
Yeah, I think the trip was to purposely go pick up some of those pieces.
What'd you think, Jamie?
I think if he was truly mentally ill, as he was saying, Phaedrus probably never left, and Phaedrus has always been a part. And these were a lot of things that he had experienced before, so he was seeing Phaedrus come out a lot more in that situation. And the ECT definitely would have helped know Phaedrus for a few years, but yeah, I don't know if he's not looking after his mental health in many ways, that's bound to kind of come back, I would imagine, on top of a lot of other things. And it sounds like life was pretty stressful just with Chris and everything that was going on in Chris's life. So Phaedrus was just making an appearance in those stressful moments, I think. But I don't think Phaedrus was ever gone. I think Phaedrus was very much a part of him.
Well, he was going through a divorce too, wasn't he?
What was that?
The history says that his wife instigated a divorce, and she was taking the younger child, and so she was leaving Chris with him, but he was like, "There's no one else can deal with Chris but me."
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't know that. I must.
I could tell that something had happened to the wife and other son because they weren't really in his life. They weren't going back to them.
At one point, they get asked when they're at that house in the mountains about her, and he says that he describes the situation with them the best they can.
And I think in the afterword, he makes mention of his second wife.
He got remarried, but I wondered when he moved overseas to Europe if he was like living his life as Phaedrus with his new wife, like he didn't have to pretend or to balance both lives, or if he had. That was one of the questions I had at the end.
Well, the author is not the narrator in the book, and so it's a really interesting writing piece because he's writing in this like fictionalized story that he makes up to describe events that happened to him, but it's not this, you know what I mean? It's not the same. He might have done those events and gone through those places, but it's not all, we don't know. Like, who knows how much of it is real and how much of it is his imagination or, you know, what.
And he may actually, in all honesty, have not known that, because Pirsig was exposed to electroshock therapy when he was institutionalized. And in the book, he mentions past memories as being like debris, that he's trying to figure out what is there. So this whole thing could have been a creation of his to try to explain things that he just couldn't explain anymore.
Was your take, so I know we've kind of described Phaedrus as a part of mental illness, and he was in the pursuit of the knowledge of quality. it was interesting when he hit that point and he said, insanity is when you stop accepting the reality that's around you. And like, there's that weird position. It's kind of like that edge of chaos where genius is the ability to spot patterns that other people can't see, and madness is the ability to spot patterns that aren't there. And like, if Phaedrus was actually identifying patterns that were there that other people couldn't see, then was he really insane?
Yeah, I just had, maybe everybody else picked up on this, I just kind of had a light bulb moment. In the beginning of the book, I was kind of in the back of my mind thinking, like, I'm more identified with the narrator than the couple, but they're just having a good time riding their brand new bike. That's fine. And he's always tinkering with his, and something's always about to go wrong. So I just correlated that to that's the same as Phaedrus trying to find the underlying form and everything. He's thinking he's better, but it's all about to fall apart anyway.
Well, because when he finds the form, his whole thought process falls apart anyways, in that, like, once he defines quality, what it is for him, he's objectified, his subjective version of quality, which is that gap in between. And that's why he was like, okay, well, when I reached the definition of quality, or when Phaedrus reached the definition of quality, it all fell apart, because he realized, like, he had done it to a degree, but maybe it defeated the purpose of what that journey was. And maybe that's part of the madness of that, I made it, but to what end?
Vance, I'm interested in when you mentioned on the network, you asked the question about art. Had you have read the part in the book where he talks about the metal being art, and then Mike Compton saying that the metal was his favorite part of art? It was like, what's going on here?
Vance's favorite question to ask people when he meets them is, what type of art do you like? Because I remember in Austin, Texas, at dinner with Elam or whatever, at Francine's or whatever that restaurant was, that you asked, we all talked about our favorite type of art that night.
I do love knowing, because it exposes a part of people that they have difficulty naming or putting into words, particularly if you don't know them very well. But if you ask people to describe what type of art they enjoy, it gives them a language to be able to describe parts of them. Mike, you taking off?
Mike.
Good to see you.
See you, Mike.
Have a good night, Mike.
So I find it to be one of those questions that opens people up in a way, in the same way that I think asking people to talk about song lyrics and things does as well. They can seem like kind of throwaway questions, but they reveal things about people.
Here, I thought your favorite question was how the world was going to look like in the next 2 weeks.
No, that was just repetitive.
And everyone
None of us were right. Everyone was wrong.
Let that be a lesson. Yeah.
Did you guys see a similarity between the narrator in The Stranger and the narrator in Zen?
Oh, that's a great point.
Wow.
I did. Now that you mention it.
I'd texted Vance at the beginning of the book, because I kind of identified with the guy in The Stranger too. And I texted Vance and I was like, I really feel like I am the narrator of this book, but I've got this gut feeling he's going to turn out to be a real asshole, and I'm going to be really disappointed in myself. So I don't know. Maybe check back with me in 10 years.
I think in large part, maybe I wouldn't have thought of this, but in large part, both The Stranger and in Zen, they are the author is able to capture the internal dialogue that we all have. Right? Like the observations that we make about other people, the fatigue that we have, the feeling of being lost, or the feeling of finding something and being upset with other people because they don't see exactly what we see. It seems that probably both of those were great works of literature because of the capturing of the internal dialogue.
And the way they articulated the nuances of them, that you were just like, oh yeah.
I really think that that this is the exact opposite character, right? Like, we even talked about how in The Stranger, he pointed out that there is only the past and only the future for him, and there's no present when he's in prison at the end. And that's the exact opposite of the narrator of this story, who is enjoying the present fully, right? And he constantly goes through these lines of thought where he talks himself down, right? Where he's like, okay, I got to relax. Chris is just upset. We'll get him, washed up and cleaned up and everything. So you see him reacting and changing, perceiving other people and caring about them, where you never ever see that from the Stranger character.
Question kind of on all that, talking about, we kind of all make our own stories. Has anyone here went through the Crucial Conversations training at all, or heard of that book? It's a book I went through training when I worked at Bobcat. And it goes through, what story do we tell ourselves? Because a lot of us, we try to narrate to relate it to ourselves, to remember the story, and we'll fill in the gaps with whatever we think happened. And during the training and stuff that I did, there's a book on it, but the training we did, they put up a paragraph, and you'd read this paragraph, and then at the end they'd ask you, who did this? And you never knew what the question was going to be. And whenever you answered it, almost everybody was wrong, because they told themselves a story based on what they heard or wanted to hear. And whether it supported their ideas or went against their ideas, they picked whatever side. And I find it interesting that with my kind of type A personality and kind of my mindset that, okay, I got to step back and make sure I gather all the data before I just start jumping on somebody and say, you didn't do this right. Like, okay, what happened? And then find out what their side is and then repeat it to them. And I found that a lot in this book is, they're just taking their side, and any part that added to theirs, like, I have a new bike. That's all I care about. I'm not going to fix it. And why would you want to fix your old bike? Every time you're always broke down, like we talked about.
Kind of on that, forming your own, reality. Did anybody catch his conversation about ghosts? It was basically articulating the forming of fictions.
Yeah, absolutely. I think Ben and I kind of talked about this, the concept that you can kind of take this to an extreme and go to the point where you would say that in some ways information is more real than physical reality, in some sense, that an idea of a place can cause human beings to coalesce and act differently in that place. The idea actually shapes the real world in a way that the real world is just kind of reacting to forces that encounter it. So it's a really rip-roaring, I don't even know where to pull the first thread to pull with this. Honestly, Ben, do you have
saying
something?
We're in the Matrix?
Yeah, sure. Why not? Exactly.
Yeah.
I know.
I had those thoughts too, or I've even thought
Well,
before
we are, right?
reading this book, like
your brain is that Matrix.
like and maybe I'm not real. Like, are all you guys real, or is this just some weird thing in my, I'm in the Matrix battery cell, and I'm just
word would be the
I'm
simulation.
just thinking of the simulation.
We're all on the Truman Show.
But the Truman Show is your model of reality, right? It's your own perception of what's going on in the real world that you're putting together based on your sensory inputs. And everybody lives in their own version of that. That's the point of this. That's what subjectivity, first person perspective is all about. And that you just don't know what other people are experiencing. So you can't speak exactly about common experiences. You just have to infer and kind of cobble stuff together.
Well, and this isn't related necessarily to the part you were talking about with the ghost, but when he talks about how the Greeks kind of pounded out rationality and that in some way destroyed the mythos that they had before that existed, and then you're like, oh my gosh, you're right. And that got me thinking about the different epochs that must have happened over time when you had one mythos, but then you found some major discovery that allowed you to transcend that part and just keep moving. And I doubt it was all mythos and then rationality. I imagine it was broken into these chapters or something.
Well, this is kind of what Ben was talking about earlier, where he systematized his own sense of quality and rendered it objective, right? Which to me is like killing it. You're taking the life force out of it, the potential to be different in the future and channelizing it into one thing. which was also kind of the critique that he gave of Chautauquas versus radio and television programming, right? That the Chautauqua was this broad, expansive thing that kind of meandered across different topics, but that radio and television were channelized into narrower, bands.
Yeah, his idea of where, like what you were talking about, where the Greeks kind of took it and ran with it from there. This cyclical reemergence of ideas from different bodies that come to those ideas almost goes back to that ghost idea, where when an idea dies somewhere, eventually it reemerges, and through what that idea causes it to like reemerge and take form through conversation and execution, and from there is kind of interesting.
Well, guys, I think I'm gonna wrap up, buy my book of The Hobbit, and head upstairs and go put a little baby to bed. But thanks for a great discussion. This was one of the great ones. Jamie, you nailed it. And enjoy. We'll see you guys in the network.